Marcus Reynolds stood in his pristine backyard, hands trembling with rage as he stared at the mountain of rotting leaves the HOA had dumped on his property overnight. 20 years of military discipline couldn't contain what happened next. He fired up his grandfather's massive John Deere, its engine roaring like a beast awakened from slumber. The neighbors gathered, phones recording, as Marcus drove straight toward the HOA president's crystal blue swimming pool. What they captured that day would divide Willowbrook Estates forever and reveal secrets that would destroy more than just concrete and water. The first thing Marcus Reynolds noticed when he stepped onto his back patio that Tuesday morning wasn't the crisp October air or the way the sunrise painted the suburban landscape in shades of amber and gold. It was the smell, the putrid, overwhelming stench of decomposing organic matter that hit him like a physical blow. His coffee mug slipped from his fingers, shattering against the flagstone as he stared in disbelief at what had once been his meticulously maintained lawn. Where yesterday there had been emerald St. Augustine grass, rolled and striped to perfection, now lay a mountain of rotting leaves, grass clippings, and what appeared to be several weeks' worth of yard waste from God knows how many properties. The pile stretched from his back fence to within 10 feet of his house, easily 8 feet high at its peak, a festering monument to malice that had been dumped sometime between midnight and dawn. Steam rose from its center in wispy tendrils, the heat of decomposition creating its own microclimate of decay. "What the hell?" Marcus's voice cracked like a whip across the silent morning. 23 years in the Army had taught him to assess threats quickly, and this was clearly an act of war. His neighbor to the left, Mrs. Henderson, was already at her kitchen window, her face a mask of barely concealed satisfaction. To his right, the Castelli's house remained dark, but he could see the slight movement of blinds that suggested hidden observers. Marcus pulled out his phone with hands that shook slightly, not from fear, but from the kind of rage that had once made him legendary among the Rangers, the kind that burned cold and calculated. He dialed the number he knew by heart. "Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, this is Janet speaking. This is Marcus Reynolds at 1247 Maple Ridge Drive. Someone has dumped approximately 40 cubic yards of yard waste on my property. I need this removed immediately." A pause. Then, "I'll transfer you to Mr. Morrison." 3 minutes of hold music that sounded like it had been recorded underwater. Then a voice that Marcus had come to despise over the past 6 months. "Reynolds." Richard Morrison's tone carried all the warmth of a tax audit. "I understand you have a concern about yard waste." Concern? Marcus felt his blood pressure spike. "Morrison, someone backed a truck onto my property in the middle of the night and dumped enough rotting vegetation to fill a swimming pool. This is destruction of property, and I want it cleaned up now." "Well, that's interesting timing," Morrison said, and Marcus could hear the smile in his voice. "Because our records show that you've been in violation of HOA Covenant 47B for the past 37 days. Failure to properly dispose of organic yard waste. We've sent you 3 written notices." Marcus closed his eyes, fighting for control. The notices. 3 yellow envelopes that had appeared in his mailbox over the past month, each one more threatening than the last. He'd ignored them because they were ridiculous. His lawn service had been picking up his clippings religiously for 2 years. "Morrison, my lawn service handles all my yard waste. Chuck's been picking it up every Thursday like clockwork." "Chuck Martinez!" Morrison's laugh was like broken glass. "Oh, didn't you hear? Chuck's been banned from servicing properties in, Willowbrook Estates. Unlicensed contractor. We sent out a community notification last month." The pieces fell into place with the sickening clarity of a trap springing shut. The notification Marcus had never received. The lawn service that had suddenly become unavailable. The mounting violations for waste he'd never generated because Chuck had always handled it. "You orchestrated this," Marcus said quietly. "What I did was enforce the covenants that every resident agreed to when they purchased their property. The yard waste on your lawn represents accumulated violations from your property and several others in the community. Consider it a visual reminder of your obligations. Marcus looked out at the mountain of decay that was already attracting flies and God knew what else. His property value was probably dropping by the hour. You can't legally dump waste on private property? Actually, we can. Section 12 of the HOA bylaws grants the association the right to remediate code violations using any means necessary, with costs passed along to the property owner. You'll be receiving a bill for waste removal services in the amount of $4,700. The crew can clean it up as soon as you pay the fine. $4,700. Marcus did the math quickly. 3 months of his disability pension. 3 months of groceries and medications for his mother. This is harassment, Morrison. This is compliance enforcement. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a community to manage. The line went dead. Marcus stood in his backyard surrounded by the stench of Morrison's petty tyranny and felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. The rage was still there, but it had crystallized into something harder, more focused, something that Morrison had badly miscalculated. He walked to his garage and pulled back the tarp that covered his grandfather's 1967 John Deere 4020. The machine was a beast, 140 horsepower of American engineering that had broken prairie soil and pulled stumps for 3 generations of Reynolds men. Marcus had restored it himself during his rehabilitation, spending long hours in the garage while his shattered leg healed and his nightmares slowly faded. The tractor fired on the second try, its diesel engine settling into the deep, throaty rumble that had always reminded Marcus of a sleeping dragon. He'd planned to use it this weekend to move some topsoil for his mother's garden project. Instead, he was going to use it to teach Richard Morrison about consequences. Marcus backed the John Deere out of the garage, its massive rear tires crushing the decorative gravel of his driveway. Mrs. Henderson was now openly gawking from her window, her phone pressed to her ear, no doubt calling the HOA hotline to report this new violation. Let her call. Marcus engaged the tractor's hydraulic system and drove toward the mountain of rotting leaves. The bucket attachment he'd fabricated himself made short work of the organic matter, scooping up massive loads with each pass. But instead of loading them into his pickup truck for a trip to the municipal dump, he began piling them into the tractor's bed. Each scoop represented another month of Morrison's harassment, another arbitrary fine, another sleepless night wondering how he was going to afford his mother's medications while paying for HOA violations that shouldn't exist. The pile in the tractor's bed grew higher. By the time he'd loaded the last of the yard waste, Marcus had drawn quite an audience. The Castellis had emerged from their house, along with the Johnsons from across the street, and several other neighbors he recognized but had never spoken to. Some held coffee cups. Others had their phones out, recording. They all knew where he was going. Morrison's house sat at the end of Maple Ridge Drive like a monument to suburban excess. 6,000 square feet of brick and limestone that dominated the cul-de-sac. The crown jewel was the backyard pool area, visible through the wrought iron fence that Morrison had installed in violation of the very height restrictions he enforced on everyone else. Marcus shifted the John Deere into high gear. The tractor's engine roared as it picked up speed down the gentle slope of Maple Ridge Drive. 4,700 pounds of machine and malice, bearing down on the symbol of Morrison's hypocrisy with the inexorable force of justice too long delayed. Morrison's Mercedes was in the driveway. Good. Marcus wanted him to watch. The wrought iron fence offered about as much resistance as tissue paper. The John Deere's front loader punched through it with a screech of twisted metal, decorative spears, flying in all directions. Marcus felt the tractor lurch slightly as it crushed Morrison's prized rose bushes, then regain its footing on the manicured lawn. The pool was exactly as Marcus had imagined it, crystal clear water reflecting the morning sun, surrounded by imported Italian tile and flanked by a cabana that probably cost more than most people's cars. Marcus raised the hydraulic bucket and dumped 40 cubic yards of rotting yard waste directly into the center of the pool. The splash sent water cascading over the tile, carrying with it a carpet of decomposing leaves, grass clippings, and the collected organic sins of Morrison's. Enforcement campaign. The pristine blue water turned brown in seconds, then black, as if the pool had suddenly opened into some primordial swamp. Marcus sat on his tractor in the middle of Morrison's backyard, engine idling, and looked up at the second-story window where a familiar silhouette stood frozen in shock. Richard Morrison, HOA president and petty tyrant, watching his perfect pool transform into exactly the kind of eyesore he'd been trying to eliminate from the neighborhood. The irony was so perfect, it almost hurt. Marcus shifted the John Deere into reverse and began backing out of the yard, leaving deep tire tracks in Morrison's lawn and a gate hanging by a single hin. Deputy Sheriff Williams looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world as he stood on Marcus's front porch, notebook in hand, watching the carnival atmosphere that had erupted around Morrison's pool. What had started as a simple property destruction call was rapidly becoming something much more complicated. "Mr. Reynolds, I have to ask, did you drive your tractor through Mr. Morrison's fence and dump organic material into his swimming pool?" Marcus looked the deputy in the eye. Williams was young, maybe 30, with the kind of earnest face that suggested he'd gotten into law enforcement to help people, not to referee neighborhood wars between veterans and homeowners association. Tyrants. "I did." "Sir, that's criminal trespassing, destruction of property, and illegal dumping. Mr. Morrison is pressing charges." "I figured he would be." Williams glanced at his notebook, then back at Marcus. "There are witnesses, video footage. This is pretty cut and dried from a legal standpoint." "Deputy Williams, may I ask you something?" Marcus kept his voice level. Respectful. "How long have you been patrolling this area?" "About 6 months. Why?" "In that time, how many calls have you gotten from Willowbrook Estates?" Williams's jaw tightened slightly. "A few." "A few?" Marcus smiled grimly. "According to public records, there have been 47 calls to the sheriff's department from this subdivision in the past 6 months. 43 of them originated from Richard Morrison or were filed at his request." The deputy's expression shifted slightly. "How do you know that?" "Because I filed a Freedom of Information Act request last month. Noise complaints, parking violations, unleashed dogs, suspicious persons, which turned out to be the mailman, by the way, unauthorized contractors, landscape violations. Morrison has been using your department as his personal enforcement arm." Williams was quiet for a long moment, studying Marcus with new interest. "That doesn't justify what you did this morning." "No, it doesn't, but it explains why I did it." Before Williams could respond, a commotion from the direction of Morrison's house drew their attention. A small crowd had gathered around something near the pool, voices raised in animated discussion. Even from 200 yards away, Marcus could hear Morrison's voice rising above the others, sharp with panic. "What the hell is going on over there?" Williams muttered. As if summoned by the question, Chuck Martinez appeared at Marcus's fence gate, still wearing his landscaping company coveralls and grinning like he'd just won the lottery. "Marcus, you beautiful, crazy son of a bitch!" Chuck was a small, wiry man in his 50s whose family had been maintaining lawns in this part of Texas for 3 generations. His English carried just enough of his grandfather's accent to mark him as locally born rather than recently arrived, but Morrison had branded him an unlicensed contractor anyway. "Chuck, this is Deputy Williams. Deputy, this is Chuck Martinez, the lawn service Morrison banned from the neighborhood." Chuck's grin faltered slightly at the sight of the uniform, but he pressed on. Marcus, you need to see what's happening over at Morrison's place. That pool water, it's not just turning brown, it's bubbling. Williams looked confused. Bubbling? Fermenting, Marcus said quietly. All that organic matter, the heat, the enclosed space, it's basically a giant compost pile now. Jesus, Williams breathed. Chuck nodded enthusiastically. It gets better. Morrison called some pool cleaning company, right? 3 guys show up with pumps and chemicals, take one look at that mess, and drive away. Won't even give him an estimate. Marcus felt something, cold settle in his stomach. He'd wanted to make a point, not create an environmental disaster. How bad is it? Bad enough that Mrs. Peterson from the county health department just showed up. Someone called in a complaint about the smell. Williams closed his notebook with a snap. Mr. Reynolds, I'm going to need you to stay available for questioning. Don't leave town. As the deputy walked away, heading for the crowd around Morrison's pool, Chuck leaned against the fence. You know what the best part is? Half the neighborhood is over there taking pictures. Morrison's been telling everyone for months that property. Values were at risk from code violations and unsightly yards. Now he's got the biggest eyesore in 3 counties sitting in his backyard. Marcus wasn't feeling celebratory. The initial rush of satisfaction was fading, replaced by the sick realization that he might have overplayed his hand. Chuck, what do you know about Morrison's business? His real business? Chuck's expression grew serious. What do you mean? I mean, a middle manager at an insurance company doesn't afford a 6,000-square-foot house and a $70,000 pool on salary. And he sure doesn't have the kind of political connections to get you banned from working in the subdivision. You think he's got something dirty going on? I think Richard Morrison has been very careful to present himself as just another suburban dad who takes HOA rules seriously. But you don't orchestrate a harassment campaign this sophisticated without resources. And you don't retaliate this quickly unless you've got something to hide. Chuck was quiet for a moment, then nodded toward Morrison's house. You know, my cousin Roberto does electrical work. He rewired Morrison's house last year, including the basement. And? Morrison told him it was going to be a home office, but Roberto said the electrical setup was all wrong for office work. Heavy-duty circuits, commercial-grade ventilation system, reinforced flooring. Roberto's done enough grow house installations to recognize the setup. Marcus felt the pieces of a larger puzzle starting to align. Drug operation? Maybe. Or maybe something else. Point is, Morrison's basement isn't set up for insurance paperwork. A sharp crack echoed across the neighborhood, followed by a chorus of excited shouts. Marcus and Chuck turned to see a small geyser of brown water erupting from Morrison's pool, propelled by what appeared to be a buildup of gas from the fermenting organic matter. Oh, shit, Marcus muttered. The geyser subsided, but the damage was done. Morrison's imported Italian tile was now coated with a layer of decomposed vegetation, and the smell, which had been merely unpleasant before, had become genuinely nauseating. Williams appeared at Marcus's gate, his face pale. Mr. Reynolds, the county health inspector is declaring Morrison's pool a biohazard. It's going to require professional environmental remediation. How much? Preliminary estimate is around $20,000. Maybe more. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. $20,000 in damages would make this a felony. Prison time, not just fines and community service. There's something else, Williams continued. Morrison's claiming the organic matter you dumped contained regulated chemicals, pesticides, fertilizers, stuff that would make this an environmental crime rather than just property destruction. That's impossible. It was just leaves and grass clippings. From where? Marcus opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. Morrison had said the yard waste represented accumulated violations from multiple properties, if those properties had been treated with commercial landscaping chemicals. I need to make some phone calls, Marcus said. Williams nodded grimly. You need to make them fast. Morrison's talking to the district attorney's office right now. As the deputy walked away, Chuck grabbed Marcus's arm. Listen to me, Hermano. Morrison's been planning this for months. The band contractor thing, the violation notices, the late-night dump. It's all been building to this moment. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe Morrison wanted you to retaliate. Maybe he needed you to do something stupid so he could hit you with serious charges. Marcus looked across the street at Morrison's house, where the man himself had finally emerged from his fortress. Even at this distance, Marcus could see the satisfied smile on Morrison's face as he gestured to the health inspector, pointing at his ruined pool like a prosecutor presenting evidence. Chuck, I need you to do something for me. Name it. I need you to find out what Morrison's really doing in that basement, and I need you to find out why he was so sure I'd take the bait. Chuck nodded grimly. What about you? Marcus looked at the growing crowd around Morrison's pool, at the sheriff's vehicles, at the health department van with its flashing yellow lights, at Morrison himself, who was now talking animatedly into his cell phone, probably to his lawyer. I'm going to do what I should have done 6 months ago, Marcus said. I'm going to start fighting smart instead of fighting angry. As Chuck headed back to his truck, Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in over a year. Sergeant Major Thompson's office. This is Major Reynolds. I need to speak with the Sergeant Major immediately. Sir, Major Reynolds was discharged. Tell him it's Marcus Reynolds and tell him I'm calling in that favor he owes me from Fallujah. 3 minutes later, Thompson's gravelly voice came over the line. Reynolds, you magnificent bastard. I heard you drove a tractor into some bureaucrat's swimming pool. How did you? Son, there are 17 different videos of your little demolition derby circulating on social media right now. You're famous. What the hell were you thinking? Marcus looked across the street where Morrison was now pointing directly at him while talking to what appeared to be a man in an expensive suit. I was thinking like a soldier instead of like a strategic thinker. I need help, Sergeant Major. What kind of help? The kind that doesn't exist in any manual. District Attorney Patricia Wells didn't look like the kind of woman who made house calls, but there she was on Marcus's doorstep at 7:30 that evening, briefcase in hand and wearing the expression of someone who'd spent the day putting together a very complicated puzzle. Mr. Reynolds, may I come in? Marcus stepped aside, noting how Wells's eyes swept his living room with the practiced assessment of someone accustomed to reading people through their environments. The military commendations on the wall, the spotless condition of everything, the medications on the kitchen counter that spoke of ongoing medical issues. Coffee? Marcus offered. Thank you. Wells settled into his leather recliner with the familiarity of someone comfortable in any situation. Quite a day you've had. That's one way to put it. Marcus busied himself with the coffee maker, buying time to think. Patricia Wells was a legend in this part of Texas, 30 years as a prosecutor, elected DA 4 times running, with a reputation for being absolutely ruthless with criminals and absolutely fair with everyone else. She didn't make house calls for simple property destruction cases. Mr. Reynolds, what do you know about cryptocurrency mining? The question hit Marcus like a cold slap. He turned from the coffee maker, studying Wells's face for clues. I know. It requires a lot of electrical power and generates a lot of heat. Why? Wells opened her briefcase and pulled out a tablet. Because 3 hours ago, the county health inspector's investigation of your neighbor's pool contamination led to some interesting discoveries. She turned the tablet toward Marcus, showing him what appeared to be thermal imaging of Morrison's house. The basement glowed bright orange compared to the cool blues and greens of the rest of the structure. That's a lot of heat for a home office, Marcus said quietly. Indeed. It's also a lot of electricity usage, roughly equivalent to what a small factory would consume. Mr. Morrison's been running an unlicensed cryptocurrency mining operation out of his basement for the past 18 months. Marcus poured coffee, with hands that were surprisingly steady. That's illegal? Running the operation isn't illegal. Failing to report the income to the IRS, however, is tax evasion on a scale that makes your little pool adventure look like a parking ticket. We estimate Morrison's been hiding approximately $400,000 in annual income. Wells accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. There's more. The mining operation required extensive electrical modifications to his house, modifications that weren't permitted, inspected, or approved by the county. Modifications that violate about 15 different building and safety codes. Marcus sat down across from Wells, beginning to understand why the district attorney was sitting in his living room instead of Morrison's jail cell. The health inspector's investigation gave you probable cause to examine the property. Exactly, and once we started looking, Wells pulled up another document on her tablet. Morrison's been using his position as HOA president to identify properties with elderly or financially vulnerable residents. Then he manufactures code violations, imposes fines, and offers to help resolve the problems through a property management company that he secretly owns. He's been stealing houses. In essence, yes, 12 properties in the past 2 years. The process is elegant in its simplicity. Manufacture violations, impose fines, offer to buy the property at below market value to help the homeowner avoid legal trouble. Marcus felt something cold and sharp settle in his stomach. My mother's house. Wells nodded grimly. Your mother received 3 violation notices last month. Failure to maintain proper landscaping, unauthorized structures, apparently her rose trellis violates height restrictions, and improper waste disposal. Total fines, $6,800. She never told me. According to our investigation, Morrison told her not to worry about it. Said he was working on a payment plan that would be mutually beneficial to everyone involved. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the full weight of Morrison's strategy settling over him. The harassment hadn't been random petty tyranny. It had been a calculated campaign to force him into exactly the kind of desperate retaliation that would remove him from the equation permanently. He needed me out of the picture, Marcus said. Can't steal my mother's house if her son's around to fight back. That's our working theory. Morrison's been very careful to target isolated residents, elderly widows, single mothers, people without family support systems. Your presence as a disabled veteran with military connections made you a complication. So he baited me into committing felonies that would send me to prison. Wells sipped her coffee thoughtfully. That was certainly his plan. Unfortunately for Mr. Morrison, your little tractor demonstration created the probable cause we needed to investigate his operation. Sometimes justice works in mysterious ways. Marcus looked out his window at Morrison's house, where crime scene. Tape now fluttered around the pool area and unmarked government vehicles filled the driveway. What happens now? Well, that depends on you, Mr. Reynolds. Wells set down her coffee cup and fixed Marcus with the kind of stare that had probably terrified countless defendants over the years. Richard Morrison is looking at federal charges for tax evasion, wire fraud, conspiracy, and about a dozen other felonies that could put him away for 25 years. His cryptocurrency operation was processing transactions for some very interesting clients, including at least 3 organizations that are currently under investigation by the FBI for money laundering. Money laundering? Cryptocurrency is the perfect vehicle for cleaning dirty money, Mr. Reynolds. Morrison's basement operation wasn't just mining new coins, it was processing transactions for criminal organizations across the Southwest. We're talking about millions of dollars in illegal activity. Marcus felt the room spinning slightly. Jesus! The problem is, while we have Morrison dead to rights on the tax evasion and the HOA fraud, the money laundering case is more complicated. We need someone on the inside, someone Morrison trusts, to help us gather evidence about his criminal clients. Wells leaned forward, her eyes never leaving Marcus's face. Someone Morrison thinks he has leverage over. Someone he believes is facing serious criminal charges and might be desperate enough to cooperate. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. You want me to pretend to flip on him? I want you to let Morrison think he's won. Let him believe you're facing prison time and need his help to reduce the charges. He'll try to recruit you into his operation. Criminals always need people with clean records to help move money and conduct transactions. And while I'm pretending to help him launder money, I'm actually gathering evidence. Wells nodded. It's not without risks, Mr. Reynolds. These aren't neighborhood bullies we're dealing with. Morrison's clients include cartel money operations and organized crime families. If they suspect you're working with law enforcement, she let the sentence hang in the air. Marcus stood and walked to his window, looking across at Morrison's house. Even now, with federal agents crawling over his property, Morrison appeared calm and confident, because he thought he'd already won. What about the charges against me? Property destruction, criminal trespassing, illegal dumping, all misdemeanors under the circumstances, community service, probation, maybe a small fine. Morrison's lawyer will push for felony charges, but given what we now know about his operation, no jury in Texas would convict you. Marcus thought about his mother, about the other elderly residents Morrison had targeted, about the criminal organizations that had been using his neighborhood as a front for money laundering operations. How long would this undercover work take? 6 weeks? Maybe 2 months. Long enough to document the money laundering network and identify Morrison's criminal clients. And if I say no? Wells stood and walked to the window beside Marcus. Then, we prosecute Morrison with the evidence we have. He probably plea bargains down to 5 or 10 years, and the money laundering network continues operating with someone else in charge. The elderly residents he's defrauded might get their money back eventually, but the criminal organizations continue using suburban HOAs as fronts for illegal operations. Marcus looked across the street, where Morrison had just emerged from his house to talk with what appeared to be a very expensive lawyer. Even at this distance, Marcus could see the satisfied smile on Morrison's face. "He thinks I'm finished," Marcus said quietly. "Let him keep thinking that," Wells replied. "Sometimes the best way to catch a predator is to let him think he's caught, his prey." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching Morrison gesture confidently to his lawyer, pointing toward Marcus's house like a general planning the final assault. "There's one condition," Marcus said finally. "What's that?" "I want the other HOA board members investigated too. This operation is too sophisticated for Morrison to be running alone." Wells smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. "Mr. Reynolds, we identified Morrison's 3 co-conspirators this afternoon, the HOA treasurer, the Architectural Review Committee chairman, and the woman who runs the Neighborhood Watch program. They've been helping him identify vulnerable targets and manufacture code violations." "Mrs. Henderson?" "Among others. Apparently, keeping elderly residents isolated and frightened was just part of the business model." Marcus felt a surge. Morrison's lawyer called at precisely 9 o'clock the next morning, which told Marcus everything he needed to know about how confident they were. Desperate people called at dawn or midnight, people who thought they held all the cards called during business hours. "Mr. Reynolds, this is James Kellerman, representing Mr. Morrison in the matter of yesterday's property damage. I believe we can reach a mutually beneficial arrangement." Kellerman had the kind of voice that suggested expensive suits and even more expensive retainer fees. The kind of lawyer who specialized in making problems disappear for people with the right connections and sufficient funds. "What kind of arrangement?" Marcus kept his voice carefully neutral, the way Wells had coached him the night before. "My client is prepared to be generous regarding the charges against you. Property damage, criminal trespassing, these things can be resolved without involving the criminal justice system. Mr. Morrison is a reasonable man who believes in second chances." Marcus almost laughed. Morrison, the man who'd spent months orchestrating a campaign to steal his mother's house, suddenly believed in second chances. What would he want in return? Simply an acknowledgement that yesterday's events were an unfortunate misunderstanding. Perhaps some community service, helping with HOA projects. Mr. Morrison has several initiatives that could benefit from someone with your particular skills. There it was. The recruitment pitch, delivered exactly as Wells had predicted. Morrison needed someone with military credentials and a clean record to help move money and conduct transactions for his criminal clients. I'll need to think about it. Of course. But Mr. Reynolds, I should mention that if we can't reach an agreement, the district attorney's office is considering upgrading the charges to felonies. Environmental crimes, given the biohazard situation with the pool, you could be looking at serious prison time. Marcus felt a flash of genuine anger at the threat, but channeled it into his performance. How serious? 3 to 5 years, possibly. More. And that's assuming the federal authorities don't get involved. Interstate transportation of hazardous materials, potential terrorist threats, these things have a way of escalating quickly. Terrorist threats. Morrison's operation was sophisticated enough to manufacture federal charges out of thin air, which meant his connections ran deeper than even Wells had suspected. When do you need an answer? This afternoon would be ideal. Mr. Morrison is eager to put this unfortunate situation behind us and move forward with some exciting new community development projects. After Kellerman hung up, Marcus walked to his kitchen window and looked across at Morrison's house. The crime scene tape was gone, replaced by a pool cleaning truck and what appeared to be a hazmat remediation team. Morrison himself stood in his driveway, gesturing animatedly while talking into his phone. Even with federal agents investigating his basement cryptocurrency operation, Morrison was moving forward with business as usual, which meant either he was incredibly stupid or incredibly well protected. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Wells. Meeting set for 2 p.m. Coffee. Shop on Elm Street. Come alone. At exactly 2 o'clock, Marcus walked into Grind Coffee, a small shop that catered to the college crowd and featured enough ambient noise to mask conversations. Wells was already there, sitting in a corner booth with a laptop and what appeared to be surveillance photos. "How did the recruitment call go?" she asked as Marcus sat down. "Exactly as you predicted. Morrison wants me for community service, helping with HOA projects." Wells slid a photograph across the table. It showed Morrison shaking hands with a man in an expensive suit outside what appeared to be a bank. "Recognize him?" Marcus studied the photo. The man was probably in his 60s, with the kind of carefully maintained appearance that suggested serious money. Something about his face was familiar, but Marcus couldn't place it. "Should I?" "Vincent Castellano. He runs money laundering, operations for 3 different criminal organizations across the Southwest. That photo was taken 2 weeks ago outside Morrison's bank." Marcus felt his blood chill. "Castellano? That's your next-door neighbor's last name, yes. Tony and Maria Castelli have been living next to you for 2 years, watching everything you do, reporting back to Morrison about your daily routines." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The Castellis, who'd always been friendly but distant, who somehow knew whenever Marcus was leaving town to visit his mother, who'd been perfectly positioned to watch his reaction to Morrison's harassment campaign. "They're not just neighbors. They're handlers." Wells nodded grimly. "Vincent Castellano's nephew and his wife, placed in that house specifically to monitor you once Morrison identified your mother as a target." Marcus thought about all the conversations he'd had with Tony Castelli over the back fence, the casual questions about his military service, his disability payments, his mother's health. Information gathering disguised as neighborly small talk. How deep does this go? Wells opened her laptop and showed Marcus a map of Willowbrook Estates, with certain houses highlighted in red. 17 properties in your subdivision are connected to the money laundering network, either occupied by criminal associates owned by shell companies or targeted for acquisition through the HOA fraud scheme. Jesus Christ! Morrison's operation is essentially a criminal real estate development project. Buy or steal properties in middle-class neighborhoods, use them as fronts for money laundering operations, and slowly convert entire subdivisions into criminal infrastructure. Marcus stared at the map, counting the red dots. More than half the houses on his street were involved. And they needed me gone because disabled veterans ask too many questions and have too many government connections. Morrison couldn't risk having someone with military intelligence training living next door to a major money laundering hub. Wells closed the laptop and leaned forward. Marcus, what I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this table. The FBI has been investigating Morrison's network for 8 months. Your little tractor incident accelerated our timeline significantly. How so? We were planning to move on the cryptocurrency operation next month, but the health department, investigation, and the subsequent property searches gave us evidence we weren't expecting to have for another 6 weeks. Morrison's getting nervous, which means he's going to start making mistakes. Wells pulled out a small device that looked like a pen. Audio recording, GPS tracking, and emergency alert system. If Morrison tries to bring you deeper into the operation, we'll be listening. Marcus pocketed the device. What about my mother? She's safe. We've had surveillance on her house since yesterday. Morrison can't move on her property now without triggering a federal investigation. A thought occurred to Marcus. Wells, if Morrison's been planning this for months, why did he dump that yard waste on my lawn? He had to know I'd retaliate. Wells smiled grimly. Because he needed you to commit a crime serious enough to give him leverage. The original plan was probably to have you arrested, use his connections to make sure you got maximum sentences, then move on your mother's house while you were in prison. But the tractor thing backfired. Spectacularly. Instead of giving him leverage over you, it gave us probable cause to investigate him. Morrison's still operating under the assumption that his plan worked. Marcus's phone buzzed. Text message. From an unknown number. Mr. Reynolds, this is Richard Morrison. I understand Jim Kellerman spoke with you this morning. I'd like to meet personally to discuss some opportunities that might interest you. Would 8 p.m. this evening work? My house. Wells read the message over Marcus's shoulder. He's moving fast. Is that good or bad? Both. It means he's nervous enough to take risks, but it also means we're running out of time to build a case. If Morrison suspects we're onto him, he'll shut down the operation and disappear. Marcus typed back. I'll be there. Wells grabbed his arm. Marcus, once you walk into that house tonight, you're committed. Morrison's going to test you, probably, with something illegal. You'll have to go through with it to maintain your cover. What kind of test? Could be anything. Moving money, intimidating witnesses, maybe even violence against someone he considers a threat. Marcus looked across the coffee shop at a young couple sharing a piece of cake, laughing about something on one of their phones. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that their neighborhood was being systematically converted into criminal infrastructure. What happens if I say no? If I decide this is too dangerous? Wells followed his gaze to the young couple. Then Morrison continues operating, more elderly residents lose their homes, and criminal organizations keep using suburban communities as money laundering fronts. In 6 months, Willowbrook Estates becomes a completely criminal-controlled neighborhood. Marcus stood up, decision made. I'll wear the wire. Marcus. Wells's voice was soft, almost maternal. Morrison has killed people. Vincent Castellano's organization doesn't just launder money, they eliminate threats. If they suspect you're working with us, then I'd better not give them any reason to suspect. As Marcus walked back to his car, he noticed a black sedan, parked across the street from the coffee shop. Tony Castelli sat behind the wheel, phone pressed to his ear, watching Marcus through sunglasses. The watchers were Bay. Morrison's front door opened before Marcus could ring the bell, which meant they'd been watching his approach from multiple angles. Security cameras, lookouts, probably motion sensors, the whole suburban fortress routine dressed up as neighborly hospitality. Marcus! Morrison's smile was warm enough to melt butter, but his eyes remained cold and calculating. Come in, come in. I'm so glad you decided to hear me out. The interior of Morrison's house felt like stepping into a movie set designed to represent wealth and success. Everything was expensive, but nothing had personality. The kind of decor that came from hiring interior designers rather than living in a space. Can I offer you something to drink? Coffee? Something stronger? Coffee's fine. Morrison led Marcus through a living room dominated by a massive stone fireplace and into a kitchen that probably cost more than most people's cars. As Morrison busied himself with an espresso machine that looked like it belonged in a high-end cafe, Marcus noted the subtle security measures. Cameras disguised as decorative elements, reinforced door frames, windows with security film. Marcus, I want to start by apologizing for yesterday's misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? Morrison's laugh was practiced, the kind politicians used when they wanted to seem relatable. The yard waste situation got out of hand. I'll admit, some of my enforcement actions may have seemed overzealous, but you have to understand I'm under tremendous pressure to maintain property values. Marcus accepted the coffee, noting how Morrison's hands remained perfectly steady despite supposedly being under federal investigation. Either the man was an exceptional actor, or he had reason to believe the investigation wouldn't touch him. Pressure from who? Investors, primarily. Willowbrook Estates represents a significant financial opportunity, but only if we can maintain strict quality standards. Morrison gestured toward the living room, and Marcus followed, hyper-aware of the recording device in his pocket. Everything Morrison said was being transmitted to FBI surveillance teams positioned around the neighborhood. What kind of investors? Private equity, primarily. People who understand that suburban real estate is about more than just buying and selling houses. It's about creating communities, establishing standards, building long-term value. They settled into leather chairs that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly disability check. Morrison leaned forward, his expression shifting to something that looked almost paternal. Marcus, I've done my research on you. Decorated combat veteran, Purple Heart recipient, someone who understands discipline and following orders. You're exactly the kind of person we need for our expansion plans. Expansion plans? Morrison stood and walked to a window that offered a perfect view of Marcus's house. Willowbrook Estates is just the beginning. We're looking at similar communities throughout Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, anywhere there's stable middle-class real estate with elderly residents who might benefit from assistance with property management. The euphemism was so clinical, it took Marcus a moment to process what Morrison was actually describing. They weren't just stealing houses in one neighborhood, they were planning to franchise the operation across the Southwest. That sounds like a big undertaking. It is, which is why we need people with organizational skills, people who understand logistics, security, personnel management. Morrison turned from the window, fixing Marcus with that calculating stare. People who can be trusted with sensitive information. Marcus set down his coffee cup, buying time to think. Morrison was moving faster than Wells had anticipated, jumping straight to recruitment without the gradual build-up they'd expected. What exactly are you asking me to do? Morrison walked to a bookshelf and pulled out what appeared to be a photo album. He opened it on the coffee table between them, revealing not family photos, but aerial surveillance images of suburban neighborhoods. Property assessment, Morrison said. We need someone to evaluate potential acquisition targets. Identify elderly residents, single parents, anyone who might be vulnerable to financial pressure. The photos showed dozens of neighborhoods across 3 states, with specific houses circled in red ink. Marcus recognized the methodology. It was the same kind of target analysis he'd done in military intelligence, except instead of identifying enemy positions, Morrison was identifying vulnerable civilians. You want me to help you steal people's homes? Morrison's smile never wavered. I want you to help families transition out of properties they can no longer afford to maintain. We provide a service, Marcus. We help people avoid foreclosure, bankruptcy, financial ruin, by imposing fraudulent fines and forcing them to sell below market value, by offering solutions when traditional systems fail them. Morrison closed the photo album and leaned back in his chair. Marcus, do you know what your disability payments will be worth in 10 years? 15 years? Inflation is going to eat those fixed payments alive. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Morrison had done his research on Marcus's financial situation, knew exactly how precarious his long-term security was. What are you offering? Partnership, a chance to be part of something bigger than collecting disability checks and watching your mother struggle with medical bills. Morrison reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. There's $20,000 in there. Cash. Consider it a signing bonus. Marcus stared at the envelope. $20,000 would cover his mother's medications for 2 years, maybe 3 if he was careful. Morrison had calculated the offer perfectly. Enough to solve immediate problems, not enough to provide long-term security. What would I have to do for it? Simple reconnaissance work, visit neighborhoods, assess properties, identify potential sellers, nothing illegal, nothing dangerous, just information gathering. Marcus picked up the envelope, feeling its weight. And after that? After that, we discuss phase 2 of the operation. There it was, the admission that there were multiple phases, multiple levels of criminal activity. Wells would be listening to every word, building the case that would eventually destroy Morrison's entire network. What's phase 2? Morrison's smile grew wider. Let's see how phase 1 goes first. A sound from the basement drew Marcus's attention, a rhythmic humming that sounded like industrial equipment. Morrison noticed his interest. HVAC system. Morrison said quickly. Old house requires constant climate control. But Marcus had spent enough time around generators and industrial equipment to recognize the sound. Those weren't air conditioning units in Morrison's basement. Those were cryptocurrency mining rigs, running 24 hours a day, processing transactions for criminal organizations across the Southwest. Marcus, I need to know, are you with us, or are you going to continue being a problem? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Morrison was done playing games, done pretending this was about HOA violations and community standards. He was offering Marcus a choice, join the criminal organization or become its enemy. Marcus looked at the envelope in his hands, then at the surveillance photos of vulnerable neighborhoods, then at Morrison's face with its cold, calculating smile. I'm with you, he said. Morrison's expression shifted to something approaching. Genuine warmth. Excellent. I knew you were a smart man. He stood and walked to a cabinet, pulling out a bottle of expensive whiskey and 2 glasses. To new partnerships. As they clinked glasses, Marcus felt the weight of the recording device in his pocket. Every word of Morrison's recruitment pitch was being transmitted to FBI agents who were building a federal case against the most sophisticated suburban crime ring in Texas history. There is one more thing, Morrison said as he poured second drinks, a test of loyalty, something to demonstrate your commitment to the organization. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. This was what Wells had warned him about, the moment when he'd have to participate in criminal activity to maintain his cover. What kind of test? Morrison pulled out his phone and showed Marcus a photograph. An elderly woman standing in front of a small house, smiling at the camera while watering flowers in her front yard. Marcus's blood turned to ice. It was his mother. Mrs. Reynolds has been resistant to our assistance with her property management issues, Morrison said softly. We need someone she trusts to convince her to accept our help. You want me to help you steal my mother's house? I want you to help your mother avoid losing her house to foreclosure when she can't pay the HOA fines we'll be imposing next. Weak! Marcus stared at the photo, his mother's smiling face looking back at him from Morrison's phone. The man had calculated this moment perfectly, forcing Marcus to choose between maintaining his cover and protecting his mother. If I refuse? Morrison's smile disappeared entirely. Then your mother becomes an example of what happens to residents who refuse to cooperate, and you become a problem that needs to be solved. The threat was clear, direct, and absolutely credible. Morrison had killed people before, and he wouldn't hesitate to kill again to protect his operation. Marcus looked at the envelope of cash, at the surveillance photos, at Morrison's face with its mask of suburban respectability hiding the soul of a predator. When do you need an answer? Tonight. My associates are meeting here in 1 hour to discuss the next phase of our expansion plans. I'd like to introduce you as our new recruitment specialist. One ho. Marcus excused himself to use Morrison's bathroom, his mind racing as he climbed the stairs to the second floor. 1 hour before Morrison's criminal associates arrived. 1 hour to find a way to protect his mother without destroying the FBI's case against a multi-state money laundering operation. In the bathroom, he activated the emergency function on Wells's recording device, sending a silent alert that would bring federal agents to his location within minutes. But minutes might be too long if Morrison decided to move on his mother immediately. Through the bathroom window, Marcus could see his own house across the street. Tony Castelli was no longer in his car. He'd moved to a position on his front porch where he had clear sightlines to both Morrison's house and Marcus's mother's neighborhood 3 miles away. The pieces of Morrison's trap were already in motion. Marcus returned downstairs to find Morrison ending a phone call, his expression grimmer than before. Problem? Marcus asked. Small complication with one of our properties. Nothing we can't handle. Morrison pocketed his phone and fixed Marcus with that calculating stare. Tell me, Marcus, how well do you really know your neighbors? Well enough. Even the ones who've been watching you for 2 years, taking notes on your routines, your habits, your weaknesses? Marcus kept his expression neutral. You mean Tony Castelli? Morrison's smile returned, but it carried no warmth. Tony's very good at his job. Did you know he has a complete psychological profile on you? 23 pages detailing your combat experience, your PTSD triggers, your relationship with your mother? The clinical precision of it was almost admirable. Morrison had spent 2 years building a comprehensive intelligence file on Marcus, studying him like a specimen in a laboratory. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to understand how thorough we are. How prepared. Your little friend at the district attorney's office thinks she's investigating a simple fraud scheme. Morrison walked to the window, gesturing toward the street where unmarked vehicles were beginning to appear. She has no idea what she's actually dealing with. Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. Morrison knew about the FBI surveillance. You're not surprised by the federal agents, Morrison continued conversationally, which means you're either working with them or you're too stupid to recognize them. Given your military background, I'm assuming it's the former. The trap had been a trap within a trap. Morrison had known about Marcus's cooperation with the FBI from the beginning, had been feeding him information designed to build a case against expendable assets, while the real criminal network remained untouchable. The cryptocurrency mining operation in your basement is exactly what it appears to be. A small-time tax evasion scheme that will result in a few years in minimum security prison and some substantial fines. The real money laundering operation runs through 12 other locations across 4 states, none of which your FBI friends know about. Morrison pulled out his phone and showed Marcus a live video feed. Marcus's mother was in her garden, tending to her roses, completely unaware of the 2 men in suits watching her from a black SUV parked at the end of her street. You see, Marcus, while you've been playing undercover agent, my associates have been preparing for multiple contingencies. Your mother's safety depends entirely on your next choice. What choice? You can continue pretending to work with the FBI, in which case your mother becomes an object lesson in the consequences of interference. or you can make a real commitment to our organization by eliminating the one person who poses a genuine threat to our operation. Morrison touched his phone screen, and the video feed switched to show District Attorney Patricia Wells sitting in her car outside the coffee shop where she and Marcus had met that afternoon. Patricia Wells has been investigating money laundering operations for 3 years. She's identified connections between our organization and others across the Southwest. Her files contain enough evidence to destroy legitimate businesses and put innocent people in prison. Marcus understood. Morrison wasn't just asking him to betray the FBI investigation. He was asking him to murder the district attorney. You want me to kill her? I want you to solve a problem that threatens all of our futures, including your mother's. Morrison walked to a closet and pulled out a rifle case. Military precision, minimal collateral damage. Wells has a habit of working late in her office, a single shot through her window at midnight, no witnesses, no evidence connecting back to you. The case contained a high-end sniper rifle with a scope that Marcus recognized from his military service. Professional equipment, the kind that would ensure a clean kill from substantial distance. And if I refuse? Morrison's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then showed Marcus the screen. A text message. Package delivered. Through the window, Marcus could see smoke beginning to rise from the direction of his mother's neighborhood. What did you do? Accelerated timeline. Your mother's house just experienced a tragic electrical fire. Faulty wiring in the basement. Very common in older homes. The fire department is responding, but... Morrison shrugged. These things happen so quickly. Marcus felt the world tilt on its axis. His mother was in immediate danger, possibly already dead, while he stood in Morrison's living room holding a rifle case and listening to casual discussions of murder. You son of a bitch. I'm a businessman, Marcus. I solve problems efficiently. Morrison checked his watch. Wells dies tonight, or your mother dies in that fire. Your choice. Marcus opened the rifle case, his hands moving with the muscle memory of 2 decades of military training. The weapon was perfectly maintained, the scope properly calibrated. He could make the shot Morrison wanted. 1 bullet through Wells's office window, eliminating the one person who understood the true scope of the criminal organization. But as he lifted the rifle, Marcus felt the weight of the recording device in his pocket. Everything Morrison had said, the threats against Wells, the admission of arson, the coordination with criminal organizations across multiple states, was being transmitted to FBI surveillance teams. There's a problem with your plan, Morrison. What's that? Marcus turned the rifle toward Morrison, the scope centered on the man's chest. You assumed I'd choose my mother over the mission, but you never considered that I might choose the mission over both of you. Morrison's confident smile faltered. Marcus, be reasonable. Your mother is a tough old bird who survived the Blitz in London during World War II. If anyone can survive a house fire, it's her. Marcus kept the rifle trained on Morrison while pulling out his phone. But Patricia Wells is the key to stopping your entire operation. Kill her, and hundreds of families lose their homes to your fraud scheme. He speed-dialed Wells's number. She answered on the first ring. Marcus, where are you? We've got reports of a structure fire at your mother's address. She's fine. Morrison had his people set a small fire to force my hand. Get to your office and stay away from the windows. Morrison's got associates positioned for a sniper shot. Marcus heard Wells shouting orders to someone in the background. Federal agents are moving on Morrison's house right now. Can you maintain your position? Through the window, Marcus could see black SUVs converging on the street from multiple directions. Morrison's expression had shifted from confidence to something approaching panic. I can maintain position, Marcus said. Morrison lunged for a drawer in his desk, probably reaching for a weapon, but Marcus was faster. 20 years of combat experience against a suburban criminal who'd gotten soft from too much success. The tackle sent both men crashing into Morrison's. Expensive coffee table, scattering surveillance photos and cash across the floor. Morrison was stronger than he looked, but Marcus had trained for this kind of close-quarters combat in places where losing meant dying. "Federal agents, drop your weapons!" The front door exploded inward, revealing a team of FBI agents in full tactical gear. Marcus released Morrison and stepped back, hands raised, the rifle on the floor between them. "Marcus Reynolds, undercover asset," Marcus shouted. "Morrison is the target." Morrison tried to run for the back door, but more agents were already coming through the rear entrance. He made it 3 steps before they tackled him to the ground, zip-tying his hands behind his back. "Richard Morrison, you're under arrest for conspiracy, money laundering, arson, attempted murder, and about 15 other federal charges," the lead agent announced. Through the chaos of the arrest, Marcus heard his phone ringing. He answered it while agents secured the scene around him. "Marcus, Jesus Christ, what's happening over there?" It was his mother's voice, strong and irritated rather than terrified. "Mom, are you okay? I heard about the fire." "Fire? What fire?" "Some idiots in suits tried to throw a Molotov cocktail at my house, but it hit the garden sprinkler system instead, made a mess of my roses, but the house is fine." Marcus almost laughed. Morrison's professional arsonists had been defeated by his mother's obsession with garden maintenance. "Where are you now?" "Sitting in my kitchen with 3 very polite FBI agents who are asking me questions about HOA violations. Apparently that bastard Morrison has been trying to steal my house for months." Agent Wells appeared at Marcus's elbow, grinning despite the circumstances. "Your mother's been giving my people a complete debrief on Morrison's harassment campaign.